Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your host, James Kaikis, and today I'm going to be joined by Cheryl Stering, Director of Sales and National Accounts at Omnigo. The topic of today's episode is Transition to Director of Sales. Cheryl has been the Director of Systems Engineering at Omnigo for more than a few years, and now she's made the pivot to sales. And so in today's conversation, we're going to get to know Cheryl more and learn more about why she made the move and how she believes that she can use her pre-sales experience to be a better sales leader. I get pretty tactical in today's episode and ask her some very specific questions about her transition and about what has made her successful so far in her sales role. So you should get a lot of insight into what it's actually like being a sales leader after being in pre-sales. And one of the other things in today's episode that we highlight is demo days. So Cheryl was a volunteer on Demo Days 2021, and now she's actually on the leadership team for Demo Days 2022. So we're going to start today's episode with a little insight into what's happening this year in the Demo Days competition. Enjoy. Today's episode is sponsored by Avneo. Feeling a little overwhelmed in your bid management? Thinking there must be a better and more efficient way to manage RFPs, RFIs, and security questionnaires? Look no further than Avneo RFX, a Salesforce native, fully automated RFX solution designed to help you win more of the right business. To learn more, head over to avneo.com or search Avneo in the Salesforce App Exchange. Cheryl, welcome to the PreSales Podcast. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Looking forward to this conversation. And actually, before we get into today's topic of transition to director of sales, I wanted to talk about Demo Days with you. So last year, you were a volunteer for Demo Days 2021, and we got to know each other really well as our group met on a weekly basis. And I just want to ask you, what was that experience like for you? What did you love about Demo Days?
Demo Days was awesome. It was really the first big thing that I got into with PreSales Collective. And it was really unusual to get such a diverse group of people together in that group that was organizing everything. And just everybody clicked. It was seamless. I mean, everybody got along. I actually looked forward to those Friday afternoon meetings because It was like we had a good time. Everybody was getting along. There wasn't the bickering and the kind of fighting. It was really respectful, but everybody enjoyed doing it. It was something that was just fun.
I've never enjoyed a Friday afternoon more in my entire life. And I really appreciate you being involved and engaged in that project. I agree with you. I mean, for having, almost 24 volunteers working on this evolving, moving project, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but a lot of fun. What was your favorite part about the project as it relates to working with the participants?
I got to be one of the judges, which was a great experience. And it was fun to listen to the different ways that people were kind of attacking the competition. But in that end part of the competition, when we actually got to do a little bit of coaching with the finalists, that was great to be able to get in there and have the conversation with them and give some feedback. I naturally like to coach. So for me, it's one of my favorite things to do. That was just a great chance. And the guys that I worked with ended up winning the competition. So it was awesome. And
you and Kevin Mefford were the coaches for the winning team. Is that correct?
Yes.
Kevin now works for the PreSales Collective. You put them in the championship. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate being involved in last year's Demo Days. And so a little bit of an announcement is that you are part of the leadership team running Demo Days 2022. So what should we expect this year?
Oh, it's a lot of fun again. There's a lot of lessons learned from last year in terms of wanting to recognize different groups of people for things, working a little bit more on the presentations and that type of thing. So we're in the early process of it. We're in the early stages of the process, but we're coming up with some fun ways to handle things. I'm excited.
I really think the Demo Days competition is such a fun way for the community to give back and, being able to give prizes to the folks who won and t-shirts and trophies. It was a really great thing that we did last year. And I'm looking forward to doing it again this year. So thanks for leading that.
And it's global too. Where else can you get people with such a different background and through so many different countries in this one competition? It's incredible.
You're right. And I think our championship round of the 3 teams, I think we had 5 to 7 countries represented. I need to double check those numbers, but they were from all over the world. I know we definitely had Australia. We had the Caribbean, South America, and then we had the West Coast as well.
Yeah, it's awesome.
The global representation is my favorite thing. Even for the solution showcase that we had recently, there were attendees from 20 different countries on the actual event. And that's like my favorite thing about PreSales Collective. And so I love that the demo days like really brings people together. So thank you again for leading that. Cheryl, we need to learn a little bit more about you. So tell us your pre-sales career journey. What got you to where you are today?
So my pre-sales career didn't start in pre-sales. The company I'm with, I just started my 18th year with, so I've been here for a long time. I was in sales. I was in professional services. So it was kind of those two roles that I was in before we even thought of a pre-sales team. And then from that role, I kind of transitioned into pre-sales, where I stayed for about 4 or 5 years before moving back into the sales side of things.
That's amazing. 18 years at one company is a long time in today's ever-moving environment. It's got to show that you're probably a subject matter expert, to say the least, right?
A little bit.
Well, let's talk about the transition to director of sales. So we got to start with the famous Simon Sinek. Why did you move into sales?
Having been in sales before, it was really a process I knew and I understood because I had done it before. I loved pre-sales because in pre-sales, you're really focusing on problem solving. And one of the things that, when I went back into sales, fixing problems or trying to solve problems, I would hear things in the demos that we were doing that the salespeople were saying. And I'd go, I would really like to help that person or coach that person. And I couldn't, it wasn't in my realm. So I could kind of say something on the side. I could mention something to the director. I saw where processes may have not been as efficient as they could have been, but it wasn't really my spot to do something. So I like challenges and I'm always open to challenges, and kind of moving back into sales was another challenge for me to take over a team and get back into it. And I felt like I could make a difference. I could try to fix some of the inefficiencies that I was seeing. The other big piece of it is, in pre-sales, we work with customers so little. You're only talking to them during the demo or maybe during a couple pre-sales meetings, but you don't get that opportunity to build the relationship. One of the things I loved about being in sales and that I loved about being in professional services was this relationship that you built with the people that you were talking to and creating that connection. And it was something that I missed that I look forward to going back to.
That's a really good point, Cheryl. And I like that you talked about being able to institute organizational change. Do you think being at the company for so long allowed you to make that transition a little bit easier because you just had more familiarity on what good and what great looks like?
There were parts of the transition that were very easy because I knew the company, I knew the product, I knew the people. In this company, it's a small pre-sales team. You work with every seller in the company, so you know the people. But the things that I didn't know are things like how to use our quoting software, because I never touched it. But being in the company for so long, that piece of it, I kind of had to learn on my own because it was just kind of like, oh, here's your new tools. We updated your permissions.
The light bulb moment for me is when you just said the building relationship and it's deeper with sales, because I think naturally as pre-sales professional solutions consultants, we feel like we're very customer centric. We are very engaged in the process, but you're right. There is so much relationship building that happens outside of those calls on one-on-one champion building that we don't really get to see in the pre-sales process. So that's a really good highlight about the difference of sales that I think even myself as pre-sales professionals, we sometimes lose sight of. What has been the biggest adjustment for you so far?
In pre-sales, you're kind of left alone in some ways. You do your thing, you do your responses to RFPs, you do your demos, you jump into discovery calls. There's a lot more pressure in sales. If your team's having a bad month, you're getting a phone call. In pre-sales, if sales is having a bad month, nobody's calling pre-sales and asking what's going on. The quiet times, that we had in pre-sales are the busy times in sales. So for me, there were certain times that I kind of looked to for vacation time, where those are crunch time now. I mean, end of month, end of quarter, end of year, you don't have that same quiet time that you had in pre-sales.
That's a really good point. And, you talk about the added pressure, and a lot of the former sales turned pre-sales people that I've worked with and met through the PreSales Collective, they're some of the best pre-sales professionals because they have empathy for what it means to be in sales. And I think that's sometimes what we forget as solutions consultants is that there is so much pressure on these sales folks to perform. It's a really, what have you done for me lately type business. And I think for sales engineers, we lose sight of that at times because we could do the best job ever, but if the deal doesn't close, it's not usually a reflection on us.
Right. And on the first of the month, you're back at zero.
It doesn't matter how well you did last month, last quarter, it just restarts to zero. So it's a very, very good point. As we talk about being back to zero, I think my biggest question around the transition is, how do you think about forecasting? Because of your background in SC, how has it changed your approach to forecasting versus maybe a traditional sales leader?
One of the things that I love about people who are generally in the sales role is they're always wearing those rose-colored glasses and they're the ultimate optimist. So they hear the feedback, oh, this was great. The demo looked great. Exactly what we need. And they're buying.
Yep. The happy years are there.
But coming from an SE role, when you're doing demos, you really listen to what's happening during the demo. You try to listen to the side conversations. You listen to the things that are being said, but you also listen to the things that aren't being said. And you use all of that to kind of build where the customer is. So you could have, and this has happened with me before, you could have 3 people in a meeting with a customer, and then you talk to all of them afterwards. And the SE is going to have a totally different take on that meeting than the salespeople did.
Very true.
So from a forecasting perspective, I'm a lot more conservative because, I understand the process. Being in an SE role, we're not a big company, so the SEs in our company do a lot. They do a lot of the paperwork that has to get filled in. They help with the IT documents sometimes. So you kind of know what paperwork needs to get done. So now as a sales leader, when I have people saying this is going to close in this particular month, it's, well, I haven't seen this. I haven't seen this. Have we talked about this? So it's all those things that I did in the pre-sales world that I haven't seen that makes me question, is it really where you say it is? And doing that forecast. Because we all know that contracts add at least a month.
They're tough. The intricacies of contracts that most solutions consultants don't typically see in the sales process. I really like that you talked about, as a solutions consultant, you get to understand what's being said, but what isn't being said, and actually applying that to sales so that you don't really have, as I like to call them, happy ears in terms of, oh, this deal's actually progressing. Have your leadership actually been maybe more on you because you've been more conservative in your pipeline approach versus other sales leaders?
No, actually, it's in some ways the opposite. They feel like my forecast is more accurate. They feel like when they look at what I'm saying is going to happen, that there's more confidence in what I say is going to actually close.
I love hearing that because, not to get too personal, but I've definitely been in some experiences where I've heard the customer tell us this deal's not happening, and sales leaders keeping it in pipeline because of their roll-up numbers. And then maybe an executive on a large call asks to know what's happening in that deal and actually asks the solutions consulting leader. And so you don't really know what to do there, right? Because sales has still forecasted this deal. The customer has absolutely said no. There is this magical science/art that happens to forecasting. But I think it's great to hear that your leadership has the faith in you when it comes to forecast accuracy, because you are looking at it with a different lens. And this is actually why I wanted to continue to talk about this topic, because even with PreSales Collective, I'm starting to see some people transition into sales roles or sales leadership roles from the pre-sales perspective. I'm curious, how else has your background in sales engineering helped you be a better sales leader?
When you're in pre-sales, you naturally want to ask questions. You want to dive deeper. And in knowing what I would look for from a pre-sales side, when I sit in on discovery calls with the sellers that are on my team, or sometimes when I'm just doing a discovery call because other people aren't available, when I'm prepping the SEs for a demo, I'm doing it from the approach of an SE. So I ask the deeper questions. I get into it more to help solve that problem. It's actually funny. One of the biggest challenges I have is sitting quiet on demos now, which I will tell you I don't do because, I sit there and the SE in you wants to come out and just take control of that demo and do it and just blow everything away. The SEs that work with me the most, they all now watch for my microphone to go off mute because they know that if I go off mute, I probably have something to say. That's been actually one of the hardest pieces is not being the SE in calls.
I believe that. You've got the experience, you've got the expertise, and maybe to spin that around, right? Like you talked about coaching in the beginning. I would assume, and tell me if this is a right assumption or not, that your background in coaching when it comes to demo and discovery is actually probably a massive benefit for your salespeople because you saw that there was a gap there on that side of the house. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, because we look at discoveries and we look at questions and, this is how you can dive deeper into the question or into the questions. And when you talk to people, this is how you can phrase things so that you're not coming off one way versus the other. Even looking into things because, from an SE perspective, you're always staying up on market trends. You understand what's happening in the market. You pay attention to what has really keyed in from other customers that you've talked to that they really like. It's something that you can use when you talk to new prospects is, oh, well, we talked to another place just like you. And this is one of the things that they really found. So trying to coach people into tapping into those different aspects to make the process better and to build that relationship even more.
Cheryl, I'm obviously asking some very detailed questions about this because I'm very curious. How did your new team react to a sales engineering leader coming over to manage the sales team?
They were all very happy as far as I know. No, I mean, having been with the company for so long and having such an in-depth knowledge of the markets and the products, they looked at it as nothing but a positive because they felt like they could learn and that I had more knowledge than somebody who would have potentially been new coming into the company that didn't have that background. They were good with it when it happened.
How have you relied on some of your sellers to enable you to be a better sales leader?
I like to talk to them and really understand kind of where they're struggling because I can't help coach somebody and I can't help somebody be successful if I don't know where they're having challenges. One of the biggest things, for example, that I found when I kind of moved into the role was there was a really big lack of understanding the product and applying the product to the market that my team worked with. So there was a lot of product education that I started trying to bring into things, having some of the product managers come in and very specifically speak to these are the use cases in this particular market, and this is how you can sell it. And these are some of the values that you can talk about. And it was those things that helped the sellers craft their prospecting emails, craft their conversation so that they felt more comfortable as they were talking to prospects.
That's great, Cheryl. Again, I'm so fascinated by this because I firmly believe that pre-sales professionals can make this transition into sales, especially the ones that really are sales friendly. Again, this is my personal perspective, but I got to ask you, is this a good career path for pre-sales professionals that really do enjoy the sales aspect?
So if you like the sales aspect, if you like that relationship side of things, yes. But you have to go in, what I say, like eyes wide open, because there is that pressure that you don't necessarily have in a pre-sales role. You're going to get called. The end of the month is coming and your team has a whole bunch of deals that hasn't closed yet that you said we're going to close. You're getting called from everybody. What's going on? Where's the deal? What do we, you're responsible for numbers. If you're coming to the end of the quarter and your team hasn't made the numbers, even if you had that vacation planned, you probably don't want to take that vacation because there's just so many other things going on. So it's a great transition, but you really have to go in with that full knowledge that you are stepping into the lion's den.
in the nicest way possible, because I've been guilty of this too. I think a lot of times on the pre-sales side, we tend to not have enough empathy for our sales folks. We tend to not realize all the pressure that's put on them, and then really what that pressure means at the end of the day. Because I don't know about you, but I can definitely remember a seller who I thought was a good seller who just was having nothing go their way. And the pressure of that quarter over quarter over quarter really changed them at the end of the day. It changed working with them. It changed our relationship. I didn't really even want to go travel with this person anymore. But, I think at the time I lacked a little bit of empathy of what they were going through. Instead of actually trying to help, I was kind of like, I don't really want to work with this person. And I think that it's very easy for us to fall into that trap, especially when we're supporting, multiple AEs in any sales process. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, no, it's eyes wide open, a lot of pressure, but great reward.
Yeah, great reward, especially financially. So Cheryl, this has been really enlightening. I'm curious, what advice do you have for someone who's exploring a move to being a sales rep or even a sales leader?
So it's important to understand the sales process. For me, having gone from sales into pre-sales and then back into sales, I understood the sales process and I understood the different pressures that come with it. So you really need to be able to understand that sales process. It would make the transition easier. I actually think that SEs can transition fairly easily into a sales role. And I think that SEs can be very successful in sales, because one of the things that has helped me from a sales perspective is because of the product knowledge, you gain credibility so much faster when you're talking to customers. You kind of shed that sales reputation because you become that trusted advisor fast, because you know what you're talking about. You explain things at a different level. You use their terminology, and you get that from being an SE, and it helps in that sales process because nobody wants to buy from a sales rep that they don't trust. They want to buy from somebody that they feel knows what they're talking about. And that knowledge that you get as an SE helps on that side of it. But you really have to understand the sales process. You have to be willing to be a little pushy, right? So one of the things that you sit there and go, I would not want to have to be the person calling that guy every 2 days going, end of the month going, you're going to close, you're going to close, you're going to close. But you have to be willing to be a little bit more aggressive than you have to be in an SE role. Because as an SE, you do your job, right? You go out, you show your product, you talk about how great your product is and how it's going to help. You're that problem solver. But now you have to be that problem solver, but also kind of that pushy person, not overly pushy, but you have to be that person that can push. So you have to just sit down and say, can I do that? Am I willing to accept the pressure, the added pressure that I'm going to have? Am I able to put that pressure and be a little bit more aggressive with customers? Because some people just don't feel comfortable with it and they're not going to be able to close a deal. They'll get them to a point, but then they won't be able to just clinch it because they're not being aggressive.
Really great point, Cheryl. Cheryl, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Good luck in your transition back to the sales role. We're definitely rooting for you and excited to hear your successes. Thanks for continuing to be involved with PreSales Collective. Excited for Demo Days 2022, and we'll see you around the community.
Sounds great. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Cheryl. All right, PreSales Collective. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Cheryl today. I always like to talk about the transition into sales because from my perspective in PreSales Collective, I'm starting to see a number of pre-sales professionals moving into sales roles. And so it's great to hear why they're making that transition and follow their successes. One of the reasons in terms of why Cheryl made the move is she said that she can make a difference. She saw a lot of things that need fixed and a lot of ways to improve efficiencies within her sales process and sales organization. So she moved to that team to help make those changes. And what she talked about is that on the sales side, in subject matter expertise or understanding how the product actually made an impact for the customers. And there was a gap there. And she talked about the trusted advisor. I feel like at this point, I'm stating LinkedIn's State of Sales Report 2021 on a weekly basis, but being a trusted advisor is the number one reason people sell. And that is why we believe at PreSales Collective how important this role is to the future of sales. And we're going to need more people like Cheryl that move into sales that continue to showcase the benefit of being that trusted advisor. And for her, building the relationships was a major part of this transition. I mentioned it in the episode that sometimes even in the pre-sales role, we will lose sight of all the touch points in the relationship building that happens before our engagement and after the engagement. What Cheryl talked about was also her approach to forecasting and not necessarily having happy ears, and understand what's being said and what's not being said in the sales process to be able to be a more effective sales leader. And I thought that was a fantastic perspective. And she talked about being eyes wide open. There's so much pressure on our sales counterparts. There's so much that goes into the day-to-day that we don't always think about in our solutions consulting roles. So it's a different world, being responsible, being able to understand that sales process, all advice for pre-sales professionals that are thinking about a transition to sales. All right, PreSales Collective, I really do hope you enjoyed today's episode. If something resonated with you, please share it on social. We really want to continue to get the word out of the amazing professionals in our community. As always, please do like the podcast, and we will see you next week.